To continue with economics A level, is still on labor market. So today we're going to a perfectly competitive labor market. Why do we call it a perfectly competitive labor market? It's a perfectly competitive labor market because there are many, it's a theoretical market structure where we have many buyers and sellers of labor, which none of them can single-handedly, influence the wage rate. That is why we call it what? A perfectly competitive labor market. So what are the characteristics of a perfectly competitive labor market? One, many buyers and sellers. When we talk about many buyers and sellers, it means there are large numbers of firms who are competing to hire workers and large numbers of workers making themselves available for job. Two, we have homogeneous labor. And when we talk about homogeneous labor, which simply means that all workers are assumed to be what? To be identical in terms of their skills and abilities, which means that they are perfect substitute for each other. So that makes it what? A perfect competitive labor market. Do you get it, please?
Yes.
The third one, perfectly mobility. Sorry, please. Another characteristic of a perfectly competitive labor market is that there's what we call perfect mobility. And when we talk about perfect mobility, it simply means that workers can easily move between jobs and location without any cost and or barriers to their movement. The next one, perfect information. When we talk about perfect information, it simply means that both workers and firms, they have perfect knowledge about the worker skills, about the wage within the industry, and about the job they have to do. Do you get it, please?
Yes.
The next one is no barriers to entry or exit, which simply means that firms can easily, leave the market and workers can as well, leave the workforce. No one is going to hold them back. Wage taker, because it's a perfectly competitive market, simply means that wages are not set. Wages are set both based on demand for and supply of. So nobody can determine the wage rate. Is it clear? Equilibrium wage rate. So it means the wage rate will be set where there's intersection between demand for and supply of labor. Any question about that? Any question, please?
No.
I think, do we have something else there? No.
No.
Okay. So how does the perfectly competitive labor market work? So how does a perfectly competitive market work? The first one is market determination. And when we talk about market determination, we're simply talking about the equilibrium wage rate. Where do we have our equilibrium wage rate? We have our equilibrium wage rate where demand for labor and the supply of labor intersect. So the wage rate is determined by what? The aggregate labor supply and demand. Do you understand the first point here? Second one, the individual firm behavior. So how do firms individually behave in a perfectly competitive labor market? I wrote, individual firms then take this market wage as given and hire workers up to the point where the MRP equals to the wage rate. So in a perfectly competitive market, firms will hire workers at a point where the MC or the MRP equals to the wage rate. That's the point we are looking at here, where the wage rate equals to the MRP or demand for labor. That is where firms will hire workers up to. Then the graphical representation is what we have here. So here, the graphical representation. Are you there? Okay. So we assume these are perfect competitive markets for labor. So a firm will hire worker at a point where the MC, where the marginal revenue product equals to the wage rate at this point, which is OB. Do you get the point there, please?
Yeah.
So what happens to OA and what happens to OC? Firms will cut back employment at OC. At OC, it simply means that the marginal revenue product is less than the marginal cost of production. So firms will cut back employment at OC where marginal cost is higher than the marginal revenue, as this will make a loss. They will make a loss here. At OC, the marginal revenue product is lesser than the marginal cost. So that means firms will be making a loss at that point. So what happens to firms? The reaction of firms is that they won't be able to employ more workers at that point in time. But on the other hand, at OA, where we have the marginal revenue product for labor, which is greater than the marginal cost of labor. The marginal cost of labor is the wage rate. Do you know that?
Yeah.
Which is WS here, the supply. So at OA, firms will be making more profit because additional workers will make more profit for firms than at OC. So firms will be encouraged to employ more workers at OA instead of OC. Do you get the point here?
Yes, sir.
But when we talk about a perfectly competitive market for labor, firms will employ where MRP equals to what? The wage rate, which is OB. Do you get it? And they will be paying at OW. Any question about that?
No.
So that is equilibrium there. I think it's clear, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Very good.
Yeah, so I think that is that. So we go to non-competitive labor market, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, Mr.
Yes.
A non-competitive market, it's either when a firm is like dominant
Yeah.
or it's a monopoly in general,
Yeah.
right?
No, in a perfectly competitive market for labor, both workers and firms, they cannot influence situation because whatever the wage determination is based on the intersection between demand and supply. That makes it a perfectly competitive labor market. But for an imperfect competitive market, it's either we have a monopsony or a monopoly. Did you get it?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to go into a non-competitive labor market now. Go to a non-competitive labor market. A non-competitive labor market is one where either the buyers or the sellers have, or either of them has what we call a market power. And when we talk about having a market power, it means that they can simply influence the wage rate. So that makes it an imperfect labor market competition, imperfect labor competitive market. But how do we have this kind of market? We are able to have this kind of market because most of the time, some countries do have one supplier of labor or one buyer of labor. So that means if we have one buyer of labor, that means we're talking about a monopolist. And if we have one seller of labor, which means we are talking about a monopoly. So in an imperfect competitive labor market, we have a monopoly and a
A
monopsony.
monopoly.
Do you get the point here? So what are the characteristics of a non-competitive labor market? One is about the monopsony.
Yeah.
For monopsony, a single buyer, which is the labor, which is monopsonies, which is often public sector or state-owned enterprise, but there are many individual workers in that market. There are a lot of workers in that market, but it is through the monopsonist that they could be able to work. So irrespective of your supply of labor, without the monopsonist, you cannot still get a job. Do you understand? So that is about the monopsonist. Then we have the monopoly, which is the only supplier of labor, which simply means that all workers in that economy might have to go through the trade union before they can work.
Okay.
So the supply of labor comes through the trade union, and the demand for labor comes through the firm, which is the only buyer of labor. Did you get it here, please?
Yes.
Okay, so then in a non-competitive labor market, we have a firm which is what? A monopoly buyer of labor, which is faced with what? A monopoly supplier of labor. So we have a monopsony facing a monopoly. That makes it a non-competitive labor market. Do you understand the point there, please?
Yes.
So that takes us to the wage settlement in the public sector or state-owned enterprise. So for a monopsonist is able to exploit market power, and therefore it is expected that it will use it to force down the wage level. Based on the graph, before we go into the graph, as a monopsonist, based on the fact that you are the only demander for workers, it means you can attract workers at a given wage rate. So if you don't want to pay workers if you don't want to pay workers a high pay, you have the opportunity to do that. Because whichever workers the monopoly has, it has to come through the monopsonist. Do you understand?
Yes,
So
sir.
a monopsonist has the opportunity to set the wage rate lower to attract workers at a specific point in time. So I wrote a monopsonist will hire labor to the point where MC equals to MRP. So for a monopsonist, it could hire workers where the marginal cost equals to the marginal revenue product for labor. But it doesn't mean it's going to pay at that wage rate. So look at the graphical representation here. So for the graphical representation, for a monopsonist, because it is the only buyer of labor, it means it's going to be able to employ workers where MC equals to MRP, and which is at what? OA. Did you get it?
OAOG.
No, OA. No, it's not going to be OG. It's OG when you can pay the highest wage rate. But a monopsonist can influence, has the market power to influence wage rates. So it's not going to pay at OG. It will rather pay at what? OE. Do you get the point I'm making here?
Yes.
So as a monopsonist, you can hire workers where MC equals to MRP. And MC equals to MRP at what? OA. But doesn't mean you're going to pay at OG. Do you get the point I'm making here? So a monopsonist will pay workers at OE, the lowest wage rate, to attract workers at OA. Get the point here. Our MC equals to MRP at OA. Yes or no?
Yes.
So MC equals to MRP at OA, which means a monopsonist would pay at OE to attract workers at OA. Unlike in a perfect competition, it will be wages at OF and employing workers at OB, where wage rate equals to the marginal revenue product. Do you get it here?
Yeah.
OF, OB is for a perfect competition. But for a monopsonist, it's going to hire workers at OA, pay them at OE, where MC equals to MRP. Do you get it?
Yeah.
So that's the difference between a monopsonist and a perfect competition. Any question about it?
No.
Good. Okay, I think that ends that. You have the activity to do.